What if Anakin didn't burn? In Revenge of the Sith, we witness Anakin lose to Obi-Wan, and as a result, he lost all his limbs and was burned so badly he was forced to wear a dark cybernetic prison of a suit for over 20 years. But what if he didn't burn? What if he still lost but never caught on fire? Well, in this alternate timeline, that's exactly what we'll be diving into, so let's get right into it. Our story begins towards the end of Anakin and Obi-Wan's nail-biting duel on Mustafar. As Obi-Wan did a backflip to land on the hill, he warned Anakin that he had the high ground just as we saw in the film. Anakin, then clouded by his arrogance, leaped to prove Obi-Wan wrong, but unfortunately it led to his defeat and getting 3 of his limbs chopped off. His left arm, and both of his legs. However, this is where our story is different from the original. As Anakin laid there, he started yelling at Obi-Wan, but in the midst of that, he was able to use his right hand to crawl his way up, just high enough so that he wouldn't get scorched by the lava below. Although he didn't do this on purpose, this tactical decision would impact the entire fate of the galaxy just by that one small choice. As Anakin slowly pulled himself up, Obi-Wan told him how much he loved him, but then he saw something. As he looked above, he saw a silver flash of metal in the sky. It was Palpatine's shuttle. He began to feel numb inside. Did Yoda lose? Is he dead? He knew he couldn't stay any longer. He had to leave immediately. So, Obi-Wan left and decided to leave Anakin's fate to the will of the Force. If the Force willed for him to live, he would. If not, then he would have to just come to terms with that. As Anakin moaned in pain, Palpatine arrived shortly after and found him lying there. He quickly told his 2 clones to get a medical capsule immediately so they could rush Anakin to safety. Palpatine then walked over to Anakin's body, whose eyes were scorched yellow and red. As the 2 locked eyes on each other, Anakin started yelling. However, unlike how we saw in the film, his vocal cords weren't burned, so he was still able to speak. He then said,
"Where is Obi-Wan? Where's Padme?"
Anakin couldn't get any more words out. His eyes slowly closed and he fainted while on the rocks because of all the pain that was overwhelming him. Sidious then placed his hand on his forehead and was deep in thought. As he looked down at his new apprentice, he was shocked with disappointment. For over a decade, Palpatine envisioned a young, athletic Anakin Skywalker as his apprentice, but now with his 3 limbs lost, he knew he wouldn't be the same warrior he dreamed of having. Although it was unfortunate, this would just have to do, and Palpatine would ensure that Anakin would be taken care of, only he would add a few of his own modifications to his healing. As he was then brought to the Medical Reconstruction Center on Coruscant, Anakin's surgery began. However, instead of being placed into a new suit, the only things that were replaced were his 3 limbs, but Palpatine had a plan. Instead of giving Anakin state-of-the-art cybernetics, he gave him old recycled materials that were used during the Clone Wars. That way he would be held back in a few ways. He knew Anakin would still be extremely powerful, so by giving him recycled materials instead of brand new cybernetics, it would make him just a bit slower and less agile. Palpatine knew that it was the way of the Sith to betray and overrule the Master, and so if he could help prevent that in any way he could, he was going to take advantage of that. Meanwhile, on the planet of Polis Massa, the events played out the same as we saw, as Padme gave birth to Luke and Leia, but unfortunately died in the process. As hours then passed, Anakin's surgery was finally complete. Thankfully, because he wasn't burned, he didn't lose many midichlorians, and both his hearing and his vision were still sharp. However, instead of the dark brown tunic he wore as a Jedi, Anakin was now placed into black armor, as well as a new mechanical hand and 2 new cybernetic legs. Despite these few minor changes, overall he still looked the same, except for his eyes that were still scorching yellow and red with hate and anger. As Anakin rose from the table, his thoughts began to race. He only had 2 things on his mind: Obi-Wan and Padme. He wanted revenge on Obi-Wan for what he did to him, but more importantly, he was terrified for Padme's life. He told himself that if there was still a window to save her, he had to leave the surgery room right away. Anakin then looked at Sidious and asked,
"Where is Padme? Is she safe? Is she alright?"
Palpatine then said,
"It seems in your anger, you killed her."
Anakin felt numb inside. His fear quickly turned into rage. No, this couldn't be. He couldn't have. He loved her. She was everything to him. Anakin then raged and screamed, and by using the Force, he tried to crush Sidious, who he blamed for all of this. But as he did this, he paused. All he could do was destroy the medical droids, the equipment, and the table around him. As much as he wanted to, he couldn't destroy Sidious. His master was all that he had left. At this point, he lost everything. The Jedi Order, his best friend, his wife, and their unborn child. Everyone. Without serving Sidious, he wouldn't have anything to live for anymore. So, Anakin released his hand and screamed no at the top of his lungs. He now finally understood the trap of the dark side. It was now time for Anakin to be presented to the public. Palpatine had called for an emergency hearing with the Senate to explain in great detail what happened that night when the Jedi tried to overthrow the Republic. He explained to everyone that Mace Windu and the group of Jedi he was with committed treason by trying to overthrow him, but thankfully there was one person who saw through the hypocrisy of the Jedi, and it was this person who saved his life. Former Jedi Knight, Anakin Skywalker. However, to protect his identity as a Sith, the name Darth Vader was never shared. The name Anakin had to be used as his public name to ensure privacy and security, very similar to how Palpatine hid his name as Darth Sidious. As Palpatine then presented Anakin to the audience, the crowd was stunned. However, before anybody could speak up, Palpatine went into great depths.
Order! We shall have order!
Leaders of the Senate, I introduce to you a Jedi that may be familiar to you. A veteran Jedi, hero of the Republic, and the one to end the galactic war. Anakin Skywalker. The man you see before you was once a part of the traitorous Jedi, but saw through the lies and treachery they had committed that night. With the help of young Skywalker, he helped stop these traitors and save my life. Now, with Skywalker by my side, he will ensure that the remaining Jedi across the galaxy will be hunted down and defeated. With this new step, I assure you peace and justice will be restored to this galaxy.
The crowd roared, everyone cheered, and Anakin was applauded. For years he was the poster boy of the Republic, and now he was the poster boy of the new Galactic Empire. The broadcast of this hearing was transmitted everywhere across the galaxy. From planet to planet, everyone was introduced to the newly appointed enforcer, Anakin Skywalker. Many cheered, many cried, but one individual was shocked to his core, Obi-Wan Kenobi. As Obi-Wan sat with his hooded robes in a local canteen on Tatooine, he witnessed a holo television of Anakin being applauded by the galaxy. Obi-Wan felt sick to his stomach. He tried so hard to hold back tears, but he began to feel numb. His legs began to shake, his stomach had a knot inside. He couldn't watch any longer. He tried so hard, but he couldn't take it anymore. So he quickly stormed out of the cantina and started making his way back to his new hut. As he walked in the desert, he started to think about that night on Mustafar and how he should have just killed him right there and then. He told himself that if he ended him, all this could have been prevented if he didn't act like a true Jedi for once and just did what was right. However, before he could think any more about it, he heard a voice.
I'm sorry, Obi-Wan.
Master Qui-Gon?
Yes, Obi-Wan. It is I. You may not be able to see me physically, but I am always with you.
Master, I failed him. I failed Anakin.
Obi-Wan, you must see that it was not you that failed him. Anakin failed himself. Years ago, I asked you to train the boy, and for that, I apologize. But you must also see, this isn't the end. In time, Obi-Wan, he will seek you. From there, that is where your true courage will be tested.
But Master, when? Will he come to Tatooine?
I cannot interfere, Obi-Wan.
Master Qui-Gon, wait!
Qui-Gon's voice faded away. Although he felt lost, confused, and unsure where to go from here, he trusted in the will of the Force and was encouraged by Qui-Gon's presence in his life. For the last few days, it felt as if he had nobody, but just hearing his old master's voice felt rejuvenating in a way. Obi-Wan then returned back to his new home and started to think about what Qui-Gon said. Then an idea struck him. What he was about to do was risky, but he knew that maybe, just maybe, something could be done about all this. Obi-Wan turned on his holoprojector.
Bail, I know we agreed not to contact each other unless it was an emergency. But now is one of those times. I need you to help me find Ahsoka.
Ten years had passed since the rise of the Empire, and with Anakin and Sidious in command, they were at the height of their power. Over the past decade, Anakin was able to hone his skills and adjust to his new cybernetics perfectly. At different points, he even made small upgrades to his mechanics behind Sidious's back to make him faster and more agile. Although he wasn't as athletic as he was before his injuries, his power in the dark side made up for those losses. However, throughout these past 10 years, he spent every waking moment trying to hunt down and locate Obi-Wan Kenobi. Unfortunately, even with his team of Inquisitors and an elite group of Moffs and officers spread across the galaxy, Kenobi still wasn't found. That was until one day an anonymous tip was sent from the planet of Naboo. Kenobi had been located. For the last decade, Anakin avoided Naboo so he would never be reminded of Padme's home. That planet was where they were supposed to grow old and raise their children together, but because of all his horrible actions all those years ago, that future was destroyed. Now, it was time for him to face his fears and for him to face his old master. Anakin's Inquisitors offered to join him on this mission, but Anakin refused. His ego and pride was too much to let anybody else interfere. If he was going to kill Kenobi, he wanted to do it himself. Anakin then set off for the planet of Naboo, and when he arrived, he was flooded with memories. He remembered when they got married by the lake, when they played in the grass, when they were still so young and in love. And then he even remembered when Padme introduced him to her parents for the first time at her family home. All these memories began to strike him, and for the first time in years, Anakin shed a tear. However, he quickly wiped it away. Now wasn't the time for weakness. Kenobi was all that mattered right now. As Anakin made his way to the capital of Theed, he walked along the outskirts where he then came face to face with the worst thing imaginable. Padme's tomb. Emotions rushed through him. Part of it was anger. Part of it was sadness. He couldn't believe what he was seeing right in front of him. Then he placed his hand on her casket when all of a sudden he heard a voice.
Anakin.
Anakin snarled. Any emotion that he was feeling was now turned into rage and hatred.
You brought me here, didn't you?
Anakin, I only want to talk.
Liar!
Anakin screamed and ignited his crimson red saber. He then leaped towards Obi-Wan and the two began to duel. Their fight looked identical to how it was on Mustafar. Their blade-to-blade combat was identical. Their moves were so in sync, it looked like they were the complementary halves of a single person. The two went back and forth. Every saber swing matched one another and every push was simultaneous. None of them could get an edge over one another until Anakin did something drastic. Using his dark side abilities to his advantage, he then force-pulled the nearby stone right by Padme's shrine and threw it right at Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's saber was then knocked out of his hands and he was then trapped under the rock. As Anakin stood above him, he pointed his saber at him and said,
"Did you really think you could defeat me?"
Obi-Wan went silent.
"I give you one last chance. Any final words, my master?"
Anakin, I didn't bring you here. We brought you here.
Anakin turned around. It was Ahsoka, standing there as clear as day. Then it all made sense to Anakin. They lured him here to Naboo on purpose so he could be haunted by his memories and so he could be reminded of what he did to Padme all those years ago.
Anakin, for the last 10 years, Obi-Wan and I have been waiting for the right moment to speak to you. There's something we want to tell you.
Anakin had enough. Her words were only enraging him, so he then ignored Obi-Wan, who was still laying there, and then leaped towards her instead. Luckily, Ahsoka had come prepared. Knowing that it might come to this, years ago she bled the crystals of one of Anakin's Inquisitors to form them to the color of white. That way, she had a fighting chance. So, Ahsoka ignited her white sabers and the two then fought off against one another. Meanwhile, the injured Obi-Wan was slowly picking himself back up to get back into the fight. Although he had all the faith in Ahsoka, he knew she would need his help. Eventually, Obi-Wan got up and as he stood on his 2 feet, he force-pulled his saber and jumped in. Flashes of white, red, and blue all were shown as the three were clashing their lightsabers. Then, in a highly calculated move, Ahsoka then slashed Anakin across his face around the same spot as his scar. Anakin dropped to his knees. The two Jedi pointed their sabers at his face, but then they paused. They realized they didn't want him to feel threatened, and instead, they just wanted their best friend back. So, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan looked at one another as if they both knew what the other was thinking and they retracted their lightsabers at the same time.
We don't want to fight you, Anakin. We're here because we love you.
Anakin went silent.
Anakin, I know what you're feeling right now. You blame me for your current condition. You blame me for what happened that night on Mustafar. But there's one thing you're missing, my old Padawan. It wasn't me who did this to you. It was your own master, Sidious. I'm not sure what he told you. But Padme never died after you attacked her on the landing platform. As soon as I was leaving the planet, she was still breathing, and that's when Yoda and I brought her to safety. She lost the will to live after seeing what you had become. She chose death, rather than to see the person she loved most become a monster. That's how much she loved you, Anakin.
Anakin was deep in thought.
Sidious lied to me?
He told himself.
He told me I killed her.
But Anakin, she left you with a gift, and that's why we're here to see you. This is why it's taken us so long to find the right way to tell you this.
Obi-Wan took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what was going to happen as a result of what he was about to say, but it was worth a try. He knew there was no going back.
Anakin, Padme may have died, but her children didn't. You're twins. Twins that are both still so young and want to know their real father. Their names are Luke and Leia.
Anakin was speechless. His chest felt tight. Twins, he thought to himself? How? How was that even possible? Obi-Wan started to choke up. A tear ran down his eye.
I'm sorry, Anakin. For all of it.
As Anakin looked up at Obi-Wan, the two locked eyes on one another. As he looked at him, he didn't just see Obi-Wan in front of him, but in that moment he started seeing visions of the people he loved most in his life, of the people that always believed in him. He saw his mother Shmi, who always had faith in him and had always wanted the best for him. Even though it was hard for a mother to do, she let him make his dream come true by becoming a Jedi. Then he saw Qui-Gon, who always believed he was the chosen one even when everyone else thought he was too dangerous. Then finally he saw Padme, that even though he did such horrible things, she always stuck by him. All she ever wanted was his love, and for them to have a happy family together, but he was too blinded by his own thirst for power that he only ever saw her acts of kindness as an attack. Anakin closed his eyes. He then looked back up at Obi-Wan. Out of nowhere, his scorching yellow and red eyes turned back to his normal blue.
I'm sorry, Master.
As Anakin then stood up from his feet, he and Obi-Wan embraced. They hugged. Ahsoka in the back cracked a smile.
Come here, Snips.
The three hugged. For a moment, it felt like old times again, but then Anakin took a pause.
When can I meet them?
With the Empire still in power, it would be too risky right now. They're both kept hidden in separate locations to make sure that they're kept safe. Anakin, I promise you, you will meet them and be the father you always dreamed of. But in order for that to happen, one thing remains. The Emperor.
Although it was hard for him to hear these words, Anakin understood and nodded his head. For so long, the only purpose for him living was to serve Palpatine and to obey his orders. However, now he finally found a new purpose in his life, his own children. This was everything Anakin dreamed of, and now he'd do whatever it took to be the best father for them. The three then sketched out a plan on how they were going to take down the Emperor. They needed all the help they could get, and luckily, they had just that. With Anakin by their side, he told them that Palpatine's main quarters were in the Imperial Palace on Coruscant. Originally, it used to be the Jedi Temple, but since Palpatine wanted to insult the Jedi, he turned the temple into his own personal palace. Then, they quickly contacted Bail Organa and told them of their plan. That way, he and the growing rebellion could be prepared. Bail was then responsible to bring what forces they had to Coruscant as well as to contact any surviving Jedi that he knew of. Despite their group being so small, they believed they had what it took to take down this empire once and for all. Eventually, the three then set off for Coruscant. On their way there, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka stayed in the cockpit, but Anakin went off to a separate room on the ship all by himself. Although Obi-Wan and Ahsoka had no idea what Anakin was doing in there, they heard him speaking, but couldn't really make out the words he was saying. As they looked at each other, they both agreed that it was best to leave him be, as everything was probably a lot for him to take in right now. Then, the three eventually arrived on Coruscant, where they then approached their landing near the Imperial Palace. Luckily, they were flying Anakin's personal shuttle, so none of the Imperials even raised an eyebrow. Anakin then walked out of the room he was in, and to make sure they would go in undetected, he placed Ahsoka and Obi-Wan into handcuffs to make it seem as if he was holding them as prisoners. That way, they'd be able to make their way in without looking suspicious. Eventually, the three made their way up to the top of the tower as they then entered Palpatine's office. As they walked in, Palpatine sat in his chair and began to laugh.
So, Lord Vader, I see you've brought me 2 prisoners. Ah, yes. Ahsoka Tano and Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's almost as if these two played a huge part in the life of Anakin Skywalker. Yes?
Palpatine laughed even more.
And yet, I feel a disturbance in the Force. Almost as if you are trying to deceive me, my friend.
You lied to me. You told me I killed Padme.
Ah, yes. And do you know what that did for you, Lord Vader? It only brought you closer to the dark side and made you more powerful than you ever were as a Jedi. But now, you have proven you are just as weak as the rest of them.
Anakin then released Obi-Wan and Ahsoka from their handcuffs, and from there, they each ignited their sabers.
So be it, Jedi.
Palpatine ignited both of his sabers and leaped towards them as the Force started the duel. Without hesitation, Palpatine targeted Obi-Wan first, who he thought was the weak link. Using both of his sabers, he knocked Obi-Wan's saber out of his hands, then Force pushed him to the ground. Although Obi-Wan was weakened, Palpatine knew it wouldn't be long before he got up again, so he had to make a move quickly. His next target was Ahsoka. Knowing Ahsoka's fighting style, he knew 2 sabers wouldn't be the way to counter her own 2 that she had, but instead he had to free one of his hands up. So he quickly dropped one of his sabers, and as he rushed towards her, he then struck a bolt of Force lightning right at her. This then electrocuted her and brought her right to the ground. His plan worked. Palpatine had disarmed both Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, and now it was time for him to face his fallen apprentice. As Anakin and Palpatine went head to head, their red sabers clashed back and forth. A duel for the future of the galaxy unfolded in the Emperor's office, and Anakin had one thing and one thing on his mind only: his 2 children. As they kept fighting, Obi-Wan's eyes began to open. He slowly started to pick himself back up. So did Ahsoka. However, as they got up, they witnessed the unthinkable. As Anakin used his free hand to punch Palpatine in the face, he went in to strike him down. But then, Palpatine stabbed Anakin right through his chest. Anakin looked down. Both his saber and Palpatine's saber were stuck deep in one another's chest. They both flopped to the ground. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka screamed in horror.
Anakin! No! I'll go check up on Anakin. Make sure Sidious is dead.
Ahsoka rushed towards Sidious's body. He wasn't breathing. That truly meant that the Emperor was defeated. Anakin really did it. However, as Obi-Wan ran to Anakin's body, he was struggling to breathe. Obi-Wan then held him, just as he held his old master Qui-Gon in his arms all those years ago.
Anakin, no. Stay with me. Stay with me, Anakin.
Obi-Wan, it's okay. We did it.
I've already lost you once, Anakin. I refuse to lose you again.
Although he was in agonizing pain, he tried his best to crack a smile.
In the ship, I left a recording. Take it. You'll need it.
No, don't say that. Stay with me, Anakin. We can get you to safety.
Anakin looked at Obi-Wan one last time, and as he did, he said the words,
You saved me, Obi-Wan. Take care of Luke and Leia.
With those final words, Anakin let out his last breath. The Chosen One was gone. Obi-Wan laid there in silence, and despite the room being torn to shreds in the wake of Anakin and Palpatine's duel, nothing was more broken than the hearts of those who loved Anakin. However, breaking through the silence were the sounds of the traffic outside the window and a large amount of commotion. Ahsoka, managing to free herself from her grief, went to the window to check what was going on, leaving Obi-Wan on the ground still clinging to his old friend's body. From the window, suddenly red lights appeared in front of her. These lights belonged to the Rebellion's X-Wing fighters who were using Anakin's intel to sneak their way past the Imperial blockade on Coruscant. They were now there to rescue both Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. 2 days later, an emergency Senate meeting was held as a result of the Emperor's death, and there Bail Organa attended to share a critical message.
Order! We shall have order!
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I stand before you today to provide a message from the man that was once Anakin Skywalker. Unfortunately, just like the Emperor, he perished 2 days ago. However, he left a recording before his death to share with you all.
If you're listening to this message, it's because I'm already gone. If I am dead by this point, it's because of one person, your Emperor.
The audience gasped.
10 years ago, the night the Empire rose to power, Emperor Palpatine promised me he would be able to save the one I loved most, Senator Padme Amidala, who many of you may have known and loved. Unfortunately, I was deceived by him and believed that he could actually save her. It was then I learned the horrifying truth, that the Emperor was a Sith Lord the whole time and went by the name of Darth Sidious. And although this might be a surprise to hear, Darth Sidious controlled both sides of the Clone Wars the entire time. He did everything he could to make sure I would one day be his apprentice. So that is why I'm here to tell you this now. The Jedi never betrayed the Emperor. He betrayed both the Jedi and you. Whether he's still alive by this point, I'm not sure. But I stand before you to tell you that I was wrong, and I was manipulated by his twisted, evil tactics to turn against all that I love, to become someone I wasn't. I'm sorry.
The audience was shocked. They couldn't believe what they just heard. By the end of the hearing, the Senate came to a mutual agreement that the Empire should no longer be in control of the galaxy. Over the next few months, more and more information was coming out, including the fact that they were almost finished building a planet-killing machine called the Death Star. As time went on, many Imperials were sentenced to life in prison due to their horrifying acts over the years, and although it took a while, justice had been restored to the galaxy. With these new acts, the New Republic began to take control and did everything it could to ensure peace and prosperity to all. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka kept their promise to Anakin and continued to look after both Luke and Leia. With Yoda eventually coming out of hiding and many surviving Jedi across the galaxy reappearing, a new Jedi Order was being built, slowly but surely. Although it took a lot of convincing, both the Organas and the Lars families each gave Luke and Leia permission to train as young Jedi. However, they didn't say yes to this because they wanted them to be Jedi, but instead, it was so that they could grow up together as brother and sister. Obi-Wan took it upon himself to train Luke, and with this new Jedi Order, Ahsoka rejoined and took it upon herself to train Leia. What was shocking most of all was that Yoda did not return as a Jedi Grand Master. Instead, he would act as Obi-Wan's final teacher and place him as the new head of the Order. Yoda believed that with all the trials Obi-Wan experienced in his life, he always remained loyal to the light and to the Jedi, so with that, nobody deserved this role more than him. As 3 years passed, it was now Luke and Leia's 13th birthday, and Obi-Wan had a very special present for them. This present was one final recording that Anakin left for them. Just like his other one, Anakin recorded this while in the shuttle to go confront the Emperor.
Luke, Leia, happy 13th birthday. I might not be there right now to look after you. But that's okay. I have my 2 best friends right by you, and they will always be there to take care of you. I'm sending you this message to tell you that if you're watching this, I'm very proud of you both, and whatever step you decide to take in your life, I will always be there. And so will your mother. I know she's not around, but if I know her well enough, she'd be so proud of the kids you two have become. I love you both. And though you may not be able to see me physically, I promise I will always be watching, and I will always be around.